to this event, Teaching and Learning Innovation, Taming the Tiger with Malcolm Brown from Dartmouth College. We're delighted to have Malcolm here joining us for a full day, a very full day of events. I suspect he's going to leave here exhausted, I hope, from staying alert with all of your questions and discussion. I want to remind all of you to please silence your cell phones and pagers and any other noise-making devices that you have. And that reminds me to do the same, because I am usually forgetting to do that. So I'll be a good role model. How many of you are registered for any of the afternoon discussion sessions? Great. There's short time periods between those sessions, so if you can be as efficient as possible getting in and out between those. We have a fair amount of time after this session before the first of those begins. So feel free to hang around after this is over if you want to and chat with your colleagues and get more food. But in between the discussion sessions, we have short turnover times. The men's and women's restrooms are on this floor, down the hall that away. The women's is on the right, not very far. The men's is, I understand, further down and on the left. And there's a water fountain out there as well. We don't have water in here right now, but we do have cups, and there's a water fountain out there, and there will be water this afternoon. I want to thank Cindy Stone and Carolyn Cotlis and Hillary Culbertson and Cheryl, all from ITS, who have helped set up the room and stuff packets and get name tags and all that sort of stuff. They have been a great help in the logistics of making all this work smoothly. I want to draw your attention to the fact that you each have a pack of Post-its in your registration packet. There are many uses for those Post-its. One of them is to register for one of 3 copies of this book, Don't Bother Me, Mom, I'm Learning. And if you write your name and CB number on a Post-it and drop it in the UNC basketball popcorn cup that's going around, we'll draw those names and mail them to you in campus mail afterwards. So 3 copies of the book will be given away. Another use for the Post-its is, if you would, think about the questions that I've written up here, and I'll read them in just a minute, and jot down answers to these questions, just to drop off at the registration table or to give to one of either Carolyn or Hillary or me or Cindy and Cheryl out front. We try to use the Post-its during events like this to get some feedback from you about what are you thinking? What is interesting to you about what is said during events like this? So the first question is for faculty, and if you are supporting faculty or a student, reword this to suit whatever role you play. What barriers are keeping you from being innovative in teaching? And which of those barriers are most significant? Second question is, what idea, approach, or technique that you hear about today do you find really appealing that you might try to go out and use? And a corollary to that is question number 3, what idea or technique or approach you hear about today do you think won't work for you, and why? And you can see, I think, while we ask those kinds of questions to get some feedback from you about where you are in trying to be innovative in the teaching and learning process. Other ideas for the Post-its, if you just have a question or a comment, an idea for a topic that Malcolm's presentation makes you think of, jot those down, and we'll be happy to take those up at the end as well. Okay? So lots of uses for the Post-its. And of course, you can take the remainder with you and use them later on. All the discussion sessions will be held here. And without further ado, are there any questions or comments before I introduce Malcolm? Okay, great. As I said, I am thrilled to have Malcolm Brown here. I don't think I told Malcolm this, but I heard him speak at Mid-Atlantic EDUCAUSE in Baltimore in January. And then Diana Oblinger, who is the current president of EDUCAUSE, recommended him as a speaker to come talk to us about teaching and learning and innovation and the horizon out there as represented in the Horizon Report, and just a whole bunch of different things. So Malcolm is Director of Academic Computing at Dartmouth College. I think he's glad to be down here in our 80-degree sunny weather.
Leaves on trees, what a concept.
Flowering azaleas.
Yeah, no, really, a flower.
His group supports the applications of computing and research and the curriculum, and is also responsible for classroom technology support. One of the discussion sessions we'll have this afternoon is specifically on learning spaces. He's worked actively with the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative, the ELI. If you're not familiar with that initiative, then please let me know, and I'll be happy to send you a URL where you can get more information. It's a very exciting national initiative related to any of you that are interested in this topic. He contributes chapters to the ebooks helps to plan focus sessions, etc., all for the ELI, the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative. He's been active in EDUCAUSE for quite some time, and one of the reasons why Diana recommended him is because of his seminal role in the development of the Horizon Report, which is an annual review of what's on the horizon for technologies in teaching and learning, and that's something that anybody who's interested in innovation in teaching and learning should be aware of, and keep an eye open for the annual release of that report. Again, if you don't know what that is and you'd like a URL, that one happens to be in your registration packet. So you can look at the table of contents and get the URL for this year's Horizon Report. And Malcolm, again, has been instrumental from the beginning in developing that report. He's also an adjunct faculty member, and so he speaks both languages, both that
Out of both sides of my mouth.
That's right. Those who support faculty, but he also teaches in Jewish studies at Dartmouth. Did a pair of Fulbright scholarships, and has quite an academic background as well. So Malcolm, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll leave it up to you to get going.
First, a few housekeeping things. Can everyone see the screen okay? Should we dim the lights or what? Can you dim the lights? Yeah. Got a call for reinforcements?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Let's get the lights right so people can see the screen. I like to approach these things less as a presentation and more as a conversation. Is that too dark? Is that okay? So one, that means there's lots of food. Anytime you want to get up and get more food, don't hesitate. Just go off and get the food. That's fine. Anytime you want to interrupt, because I think of this more as a meandering kind of a collective exploration of the theme of innovation, which is what I'm hoping that this will turn into. So anytime you have a question or anything like that, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's pause and address the issues that you find are particularly relevant to you. Because I'm going to bring things that I think are kind of an interest to us, all sharing an interest in education and learning, but again, you might have specific things that you might want to kind of move into, and that's fine. So let's do that. So please feel free to make this as interactive as we can and not just kind of straight lecture. Okay? I think it's extremely appropriate to bring together the concepts of innovation and learning, because as far as I can understand it, how we learn is an innovative process, and the innovation process itself, when you begin to unpack it and watch it unfold, is itself a process of learning. So they actually are very, very closely linked in my mind. And if nothing else, I want you to come away with the thought that innovation, when you really start to unpack it and look into what's in that box, is a very, I don't want to say that, I don't mean to be discouraging, but it is and can be a very long and difficult process. It's very, very complex, it's very rich and rewarding, but there's a lot more to it than we might think, just as we think about innovation as being just having a good idea. So that's the main thing I want to start to kind of wade into, I think, a little bit. So let's plunge in here. So the subtitle was sort of Taming the Tiger, and we could kind of look at that a little bit deeper and say, why should innovation be a beast? Is it a beast at all? So when you gaze into innovation, is this maybe what looks back at you? This type of countenance. And it can be. This is exactly what innovation can be, because there's a lot that's involved in it, and probably the hardest thing of all that makes this happen is that you're changing your culture and your practices, and that's the real challenge in innovation. The idea turns out to be the easy part. The change, the cultural change and change of practices that you have to make your innovation take hold and move on, that's the challenging part. But you know, innovation is not just a beast, because there are different types of beasts. I mean, when you think of the tiger, this is a tiger, but there are other types of tigers as well. This is a kind of butterfly called the tiger swallowtail. It's a tiger, all right, and it's a beast, but it's a different kind of one. So innovation has two faces to it, or two aspects to it. One that is the tiger swallowtail, but the other is the tiger as in terms of the feline. So let's look at that and see why that might be the case. I have far too many slides, and we're not going to be able to get through them before 11:30, which is fine. So at some points I may try to scoot us along a little more quickly here. Anyone have any questions, any points so far?
Will the complete set of slides be available?
I will make them available. I need to filter out the stuff that I have just grabbed from the internet that I might not have copyright permission to use in that context, but sure.
And I have a logistical question. Would you prefer, we were trying to hide the cable, would you prefer not to step on the user?
Cable's fine. That's okay. If I fall
So
on my
you're okay the
face,
way you are, okay.
I'll just think of it as sort of some entertainment. Taming also, I think, is interesting from a point of view of trying to manage a learning environment, particularly one as richly complex as a higher education one. And if we think about splitting that whole arena up into a kind of a pie, these are just the major points, I think, or the major aspects of trying to, you feel sometimes, I'm sure, like a juggler at a circus, trying to manage all these pieces that come together and blend and fit well together. So we have, the faculty and their pedagogical goals, the institutional culture is a factor, how people learn is a factor that we need to take into consideration, the support for all this, the technology for all this, then our students who are changing rapidly and morphing on us rapidly with every sort of things like every year brings a new twist to the students. So it's really a very, very complex sort of thing. And the term taming, in terms of trying to orchestrate this well and bring it together, seems to be kind of an apt way of going after it. So I came across this little phrase in one of the books I was reading, and I just wanted to pause here. What would we mean by, first of all, do you think that this characterization here is at all apropos of the times we live in? Anyone here feel that that things are slow paced and change is not very quick? Got one.
Should I respond?
Oh, if you wish, sure.
I think the problem started with Gutenberg. Once
Okay.
we got linear thinking, then we've not gotten out of it. And as soon as we get away from bound books and let people go multidimensional, mind maps, or whatever, then exciting things happen.
That's right. Good. I agree with that. So that's one that's not the way that this author intended nonlinear in this case, but I like that. It's good. So we have a lot of instead of a linear sense of progress, we have a lot of things popping up all at once, and we're trying to see how they interconnect into a whole. Anyone else have a thought what nonlinear change might be? This particular author was thinking more of change that happens not at an even pace, but by fits and starts. And sometimes it leaps ahead, sometimes it stops and leaps ahead. So these sudden jolting sorts of sensations of change is what this person, this particular author, was getting at. And I think that's apropos of the times we lived in, but also apropos particularly of the learning enterprise. I think of all the areas that we support at our universities, if you think of administrative computing, you think about technology for research, I think that by far the one that's changing the most rapidly and the most sort of experiencing upheavals almost on a daily basis is the area of learning. So I think that our whole learning enterprise is characterized by these rapid and nonlinear changes that are coming on. Here is an article that appeared in Edgecast Quarterly, and it's apropos. We have to rethink our technology leadership, again, in an era of change. So the outline I'm going to propose that we pursue this morning is that first, I'd like to explore learning as a process of continuous innovation. So we make a connection from the learning enterprise and how people learn into innovation. Then I'd like to try to unpack the term innovation, the concept of innovation a little bit so we can look around and rummage around in that box and see what's in there. Then I'd like to kind of take a tour as what I call the conundrums of innovation, some of the problems or challenges of innovation that may not be as readily apparent as one might think. I'd like to look a little bit at the Horizon Report. That's a vehicle or a probe or a tool for innovation. And then to say, at the final stage, if we can make it this far today in an hour and a half, what are we going to do now? Now that we have all this in front of us and all these challenges there, what are we going to do? And it's not just, I think, just the educational technology units. I think it's also the faculty and the students that are facing this too. How are we going to organize and orchestrate ourselves and be successful in our learning in an era of rapid change?
Malcolm, how do you deal with all this, with information overload? Because with innovation, how do you pick it out? We've got so much going on. It's picking the right things.
There's no easy answer to that, and there's no satisfactory answer to that, I don't think. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to just hold that question. Maybe this is something you want to maybe make a note on your post-it pads. Let's hold that right, keep it in the back of our minds, maybe circle back around to it. Because I don't think that's an issue that has any easy answer at all. But one possibility is the collective. That is, you have a collective amount of people monitoring information. you have, in a sense, agents going around searching, helping you in that search. It's not just up to you to collect all and examine all the information. Okay, so this is what I'm proposing as a way to go ahead. So let's take a look. Anyone ever read this book to their kids? Or not even to their kids, just to themselves? Anyone know this book? Who knows this book? Anyone? Can you tell, do you remember the story of this particular picture?
Yeah, they were trying to identify something that they hadn't seen before, I believe.
Right. Anyone remember a little more detail? What's the story behind this picture? Yes, but you're exactly right. So the story is you have a tadpole and a fish in a pond. And the tadpole obviously grows up, becomes a frog, leaves the pond, goes out, sees the world, comes back, and starts telling the fish about what some of the things he's seen. And the frog says, well, I saw these critters out on the grass, where the grass is, and they have horns, and they have spots on them, and they have these pouches hanging down, and they chew on grass a lot. So what does the fish do? The fish has never been out of the pond. So the fish begins to imagine this critter as the frog is narrating it. And what does the fish do? It takes this information. Anyone? What's it doing?
Puts it in his own context.
Puts it in his own context. It's thinking of a fish. It's just these funny fish with these kind of weird sort of grass hanging out of them out. So I like this picture because this, as far as I can tell from the research, this is how we learn. We're fish in the pond, and when we get new information, what we do is we try to map it into a paradigm, a set of concepts, sets of expertise that we already have. And that's what the learning process is about. This is a book that tries to summarize the more recent research on how people learn. It's done by the National Research Council, and it's available. You can get the whole thing off the web. So it's a good point of departure if you haven't done any reading recently on learning theory. It's a good place to kind of get going. Basically, the idea is that we learned that the constructivist theory seems to be one that's most persuasive right now. It says that our knowledge is constructed, that we are constructing our knowledge. We're not blank tablets and information gets poured into us like pouring water into an empty bucket. Instead, it's a very active process of construction. We are the constructors of our own knowledge. And it's most fundamentally trying to reconcile information that we receive with the old. The information, the paradigms that we have, how can we reconcile that with information that we're receiving on a minute-by-minute basis? So it is very much based on paradigms. That's our foundation. That's our point of reference for trying to understand and make sense of the information that comes our way, as I said, on a day-to-day basis. So the information we get, we just don't passively receive and just how deposit it, like putting something into an attic. We're working on it all the time. It's transformed, it's organized, we scaffold it, we elaborate, and a lot of times we even deny it. But the point is that we're not merely passive critters. So example, just a little example. So here's my expertise, my paradigm. Here's what I know about the world. I get some new information. It comes in, and maybe it doesn't change that at all. Maybe it just reinforces it. This is, yes, there's another case. I can continue my way, and the paradigm is fine. It can also be that new info comes in, and I have to shift the paradigm and change it a little bit to accommodate the new information. But this is basically, at least what the research is telling us, as far as I can gather, this is what we're doing when we learn. And we're learning all the time. Any questions?
Yeah, it depends on the
Protestations
order.
of innocence or something?
It depends a lot on the order with which those informations arrive, right? Because if the one on the right came first, you might go to the start, and the left one comes in, you might start to revert back to where you were.
Right, exactly. That's a good point. The key, though, is this thing here. So when you begin on an educational enterprise, particularly if you're the instructor or the teacher, you have to think about, one of the implications is, what does this look like for your students? And that's where you got to start, and that's where you have to find them. So out of this research, and again, as far as I can tell, here are some of the key findings. One is that the preconceptions of the learners are key. You won't be as successful if you ignore those. You will be if you take them into account when you're planning your curriculum. Expertise, according to this research, consists of this. One, yes, you have a large factual context or extent. You know a lot of facts about a certain subject. You have an organizing conceptual framework that allows you to access and retrieve and make use of that data. So it's not just sitting there kind of randomly scattered. It's organized into a set of concepts so you can apply it with efficiency. That's what expertise is. And another thing that's interesting is that they're finding that what's important to promote learning is what they're calling this metacognitive aspect. The more you make learners, you involve learners explicitly in the process of their own learning, the stronger the learning is. And they're finding that's a very, very important point. We'll come back to that. And that's what, in this particular book, How People Learn, they call it the metacognitive aspect of things. So I'd like at this point to kind of, let's do an example. Let's test this theory and see if it works. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you a poem. I'm going to put it on the screen for a few seconds. I want you to see if you can memorize it. Okay? Ready? Here we go. All right. Did anyone memorize it? Someone?
To be or not to be? That is the question.
That's the question. Right. Okay. Very good. Now let's do another one. You ready for another one? Here we go. Time's wasting. All right. Who can recite that one? Anyone? All right, so let's go back and look. I think that we all might have said, yeah, the second one's a little tougher nut to crack than the first. Why? Why is the second one more difficult for us to memorize than the first one?
It's a new language.
Different language, that's right. Yes?
You already know it.
Already know which?
To be or not to be.
Right, you already know it, right? If you happen to be a Shakespeare scholar, you don't even have to memorize it, right? You just know to be or not to be. That's the question. And you say, that's Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1. I just know that already. It's in that factual extent. What else? Why else is what might we see? What else might make that second poem a little more challenging to memorize?
It's only caps.
It's only caps. Very good.
And it doesn't have punctuation.
It doesn't conform to some of the clues that we would use to help memorize it and get our lights and steer by it, which is things like capitalization, punctuation, and things of that sort. So it's not only the fact that the words don't mean anything, but the fact that the whole sort of grammatical structure of the second poem confounds our paradigm.
And there's little motivation because we don't know what it means.
There's little motivation, right? There might be if I said yes. There's going to your grade depends on being able to recite that. But there's this poem here was a Dada poem, and the Dada is, some of you may know, we're trying to confound us by doing things exactly, to pull this mind trip on us by confounding our ordinary understanding. But, again, to show, if you had the right context, you might know this already. In the right context, I happen to be a fan of the Talking Heads rock group, and they used the lyrics of this poem for one of their songs. So if you knew that song already, you would have no problem. Again, it's because you had that expertise already there, and this just fit into it nicely. If it doesn't fit into it nicely, then your learning is much more challenging. Let's look at a second example. How many here, anyone here who plays chess? Chess? Anyone who says somewhat? Come on, don't be shy. I need a volunteer. Okay? You, good sir. What's your name? Fred. Fred? Okay, Fred. If I were to show you this and say, I'm not going to do this to you, but if I said, okay, I'm going to show this to you for about 10 seconds, can you tell me, when I take it away, can you remember where the knights are?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be very challenging?
I could probably do it.
You could probably do it, right. But if I were to do this one and say, now, I'm going to show it to you for 7 seconds, now memorize the rooks, where all the rooks are. Think that wouldn't be as easy?
No.
It wouldn't be. And the reason is, for those of you who don't play chess, is that where the knights are on this first board is pretty standard. You just know that those are typically the first squares the knights move into. You don't have to memorize it. You just know that those are the standard squares that the knights typically move into first. Whereas on the second one is by the normal rules of chess, you cannot have a configuration of pieces like that. It is impossible to have that configuration. And the thing that's interesting is that even an expert would struggle to memorize this position. The blindfolded grandmasters, as long as the whole boards conform to the rules of chess, they could play 40 boards simultaneously. They were the great grandmasters blindfolded because they had that point of reference and it matched their expertise and their knowledge and experience so closely. You do something that's essentially chess chaos here, and their expertise breaks down as well.
I think there's a second reason. We're dealing with symmetry and asymmetry.
True? Yes.
Left one
Yes, I agree.
symmetric, one on the right is asymmetric, and innovation is asymmetric.
Yes, but even those perceptions of what is symmetric and asymmetric could depend on my expertise and understanding. It's possible that we could imagine a set of rules that might make this look to be very symmetric, if the rules were different. So I think you're absolutely right, but I think what's important is that perception of symmetry or asymmetry or chaos and organization depends a lot on my past experience, what that knowledge paradigm I have in my head and I'm carrying around in my head.
So
Okay.
part of the paradigm is a developmental one.
Oh, yeah.
where you know where things start
Yep.
and the probabilities of things going in a certain direction. And then in addition, the number of pawns is much greater, so it's more than 7, so it's much harder to keep track of even if you,
Right. Right. There was an article in Discover magazine in which they covered these contests. They have world contests in which people compete on memorizing decks of cards. You know, they just go like this, and you have to recite the order of the cards back, and it's a randomly shuffled deck. And what the strategies they use is that it's like anyone here do a classic Latin? Do classic Latin? And all what do you call those formulas in which you could remember, or the syllogisms? And you memorize them by memorizing little poems. You could just map the syllogism form to the letter and stuff like that. They do things like that. In order to be able to memorize a deck of cards going past like that, they build these sorts of things. They map it into something so they have points of reference. And it's not just brute memorization. The notion of brute memorization is a kind of a myth. Okay.
In fact, I had a professor as an undergraduate who had a class of 50 students, and he knew everybody's name by the second class because he took notes about he made up a story about each one of us.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we do it. So learning is, as far as I can tell again, it's a pretty active process. We're not passively sitting there just soaking things up. It's based on context and paradigms. And it's strengthened through things like interaction, formative assessment. Is that a concept as opposed to summative assessment? Formative assessment are like little mini tests you can give yourself as you go through material to assess your understanding. They don't count for a grade often. It's just so, did I really get it? Let me give myself a quiz. And if I didn't get it, I'll go back and review it. If I did get it, then I maybe can move ahead. And by discovery and invention. And because there's that metacognitive element that's important to learning, that is to get the students involved explicitly in designing their paths and their way through the material. Again, I like this is from the Mills Learning Commons. Look at all these active verbs. You don't come to the Learning Commons and just sit and take notes. This is what you're supposed to be doing. So this is a professor who is a professor of psych at Dartmouth, and he teaches learning theory. And this is one of his pet ways of trying to sum it up. The people who are doing are the people who are learning the most. The people who are doing the most are the people who are learning the most. Not only learning the most in terms of some sort of quantitative sort of measure, but their retention period is much longer and stronger than people who are not. And here's another one. I like these thought slides. Just put them in here from time to time. If you're teaching all the time, the students don't have time to learn, which I think is an important point. All right, that was a quick run through kind of learning theory and kind of developing that aspects of things. Anyone have any comments, thoughts? Sure.
I think another aspect to it is that learning is more effective if it's meaningful, if it's personally meaningful.
That's very true, and what makes that personally meaningful is that somehow what you're learning ties into something, your paradigm, your concepts, that sense of who you are and what is going on for you. Again, that's what that whole theory agrees with you entirely. It says that the learning will be more successful the more that this information that's coming in can tie into your personal context and show that there's meaning there in some way or another. If you can establish that, then the chances the learning will be richer.
Malcolm, on your one in your chess, especially with the rooks, you violated a rule that someone had already known how to do chess. So now when you look at information, how do you know the rules still apply? Because now you're going to have to start challenging where we're used to taking information more because you apply the rules.
Right. So if the rules are starting to get confounded, then we're all kind of at sea. And if we don't adjust that paradigm, then we have this tension between, this is not fitting, and this is the experience. I'm going to give this away because I'll cover this later, but I'm using paradigm in the Kuhnian sense, the structure of scientific revolutions, that the paradigm for the scientists forms a kind of agreement base upon which they design and conduct their experimentation. It's kind of this sun in which all their experimentation satellites and planets orbit around. Every once in a while, there's enough contradictory information that there's a sudden shift that happens, and the whole thing gets turned on its head, and a new paradigm gets formed, and then they go off on a new set. So that's what I'm kind of using in that sense. And yes, if there's contradictory information that's coming away, I might have to assess a lot of my paradigm and maybe reshape it, if that's what your question was. Okay, any other sort of comments before we leave learning explicitly? Okay, step 2 for us this morning then is unpacking what we mean by innovation. So when we talk about innovation and I show you this picture, why do you think I might show this picture? Remember the famous phrase with this object? Sorry?
How to build a better mousetrap.
If you build a better mousetrap,
The world will be the path to your door.
so that's yes, the world will be the path to your door. So that's often what we think innovation. If I just have this terrific idea, if I invent this thing, the world will come to me, and I'll be a millionaire or something like that. But in any case, the innovation will be successful and fused. Okay, what's this? I'm suggesting this is a counterexample. What is this? Yes, great. Exactly. What was the story about Betamax?
Better quality.
What was the story there? Does anyone recall what the story was?
Shorter.
The format wars, we just saw our most recent set of format wars, Blu-ray and HD DVD just got concluded, but remember this first one back in the 70s?
I think Sony had a fairly high license fee for using that technology, and it made it a little bit prohibitive for rapid diffusion.
Exactly. So there was a format war in the 70s, and Sony came out and was championing this format called Betamax. And there was another one that was brought up by JVC called VHS. And they were the exact same, the players were incompatible, the tape sizes were different, all the usual things that we just saw with Blu-ray and HD DVD. Most people said that this critter here was technologically superior to the VHS. But what happened in the end? The inferior technology went out. It went out, and one of the reasons why is that they fumbled the ball, at least the accounts that I've read, is that the Betamax never had, in terms of length of time, the recording capacity that VHS did. Now there might have been, I'm not sure about the licensing costs, there might well have been the case that Sony was charging too much. But these things just couldn't record as much time, and so eventually the consumers were going down to VHS because they didn't mind the lesser video quality. They just, what was important to them was having additional capacity for recording stuff. So I juxtapose these two things to sort of first to kind of rid us of the assumption that just because you have a good technology or a good idea, it's going to carry the day. I think stories like this show that there are a lot of other factors in play when you talk about an innovation and its chances of sprouting legs and walking around and being successful. Okay. Any questions, comments? Anyone want to get some more food? Again, feel free. There's lots of it back there, and we can't leave until it's all gone, right? So we got. Looks like we got a fair ways to go here. All right. So, what does innovation mean, just in terms of a dictionary sense? Okay, it's a new method, idea, or product, etc. So as technological innovations designed to save energy. Okay, so that's what the dictionary will tell us what it means. Now let's look at synonyms for it. Look at all these: change, alteration, revolution, upheaval, transformation, all this good stuff, right? Modernization, novelty, newness, creativity, ingenuity, inspiration, inventiveness, and informally a shakeup. That sounds like what innovation is, but it certainly doesn't go far enough, I don't think. Again, I think what this does is that it reinforces that innovation, depends how you use your terms and define our vocabulary a little bit, but that somehow this is what innovation is all about, is the idea. And if you read the literature, you find out that innovation, particularly if you kind of come at it from the point of view of business and marketing and stuff, that the idea is like 2% of what innovation is about. It's only 2% of all it. So let's plunge in here a little bit more. So innovation is change. Change happens, so ergo innovation is happening all the time, on one scale or another. You can't escape it. And innovation it's edgy, it's risky, it's a pain in the butt. It's fun sometimes. It's overrated. It's underrated. It's multifaceted. It's tedious. It's funny. It's tragic. And it's cool. At least we like to think it's cool, right? Innovation is cool. You know, you want to be associated that we all like to think that we're innovative, enterprising people and not stodgy, sort of stick in the mud, so we're doing the same thing all and over again. So we'd like to think that innovation is cool. But again, I wonder if that's really the case. So is innovation, do you think innovation is cool?
You've never said it's better yet.
Sorry?
You've never said it's better.
Good. No, I haven't yet. So let's take a look here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I love this critter. This critter. I'm just curious. Does anyone recognize this critter?
Cane toad.
My uncle, right? And I like to think of it because this reminds me sometimes when we tell our users that the new version is out, and they say, you know what, we have to upgrade again. Or you go to the fiscal folks in the provost's office and say, well, the vendor just raised our licensing fees, and this is what they tell you. They say, you IT people, that's not that money. But anyway, I heard the magic word. Someone did know what it is.
Cane toad.
It's a cane toad. Okay, so let's look at this, and then try to see if innovation is always cool. So what's this critter about? This critter has been called the unwanted amphibian. It's also been called Australia's one of their worst environmental disasters. And it is indeed the cane toad. So the story of the cane toad is as follows. They were raising cane in Australia. And in the 30s, someone got the right idea to say, well, there's these toads that are over in the Caribbean, and they go after this thing called the cane beetle. The cane beetle is an insect that can ruin your crop. The mature cane beetle eats the leaves, but the larvae will eat at the roots of the plant. So it's a big pain in the butt. It's a big problem. So they said, well, let's bring these toads over and have them control the cane beetle for us. And so in the 30s, they brought a shipload of about 100 of these, and then kind of let them loose. Bad idea. The bad idea is, one, that these cane toads can't get to the top of the plant to eat the mature beetles because they're on the ground. The cane is up here, so they don't really do a good job. These things can breed prohibitively fast. They can, in a single spawning, lay 30,000 eggs.
Whoa.
They are growing at the rate, their geographical region is growing at the rate of 25 miles a year. Not only that, they have no predators. And why? They have a toxin in their skin that is so efficacious. They have lots of samples of snakes who died while still trying to ingest the toad in its mouth. It's still in its mouth, and it's died because it's already sort of ingested the toxin. So there ain't no one who's going to come along and eat these things. If you look in a pond, you can't distinguish the tadpoles of this from the tadpoles of frogs. This thing eats frogs. This thing is just out of control. And they actually have to put up fences in Australia, I understand. You have to put up a physical barrier to keep these cane toads from spilling into another region. So someone thought they had a great idea for innovation, had an idea, boy, this sounds great, but it turns out to have been, as they call it, one of the biggest disasters for Australia's environment, unfortunately. So the question is innovation cool? I think we have to say it depends. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it sure ain't. I'm sorry, did you have a comment?
They didn't do any testing before running.
Well, when I read about this, some people said, I don't know if this is a good idea back in the 30s, but other people said, nah, what do you know? This seems like a great idea, so they went ahead and did it.
Good or bad?
And once they let them out of the box and put them into the environment, the cane toad was out of the bag, as it were.
Good or bad, depending on the context. Pretty good for the cane toad.
Yes, right. Yes, right. Very good. Yeah, so it is context specific. So I simply point that out that we think of innovation as cool. We all want to be innovators, but not all innovations are created equal, I don't think. Okay. So that's kind of beginning to unpack. We'll unpack it some more now. I want to turn to what I call the conundrums of innovation, because often we think of innovation as just being this cool thing. We're going to go off and make the world safer, better, stronger, faster, or braver. And we don't think of it so much in terms of involving conundrums. But let's take a look here and see what happens. The literature tries to distinguish a bit between two types of innovation. I think this is helpful to get our thinking to go a next step. One are called sustaining innovations. So here's an example. Microsoft Office Dear Office, we love Office, right? So they came out with a new version for Windows in 2007. They came out now with the Mac version now for 2008. And this is what's called a sustaining innovation. That is to say, it really doesn't change, not very much has changed. They've moved some things around, maybe the program runs a little faster, has a few new features. The basic functions intact, they just made it better. That's a sustaining innovation. And that's the one that we're all comfortable with and we all want, because now my recorder will record more time, or there's more RAM in my iPod, or whatever it might be. Those are all examples of sustaining innovation. And then there are disruptive ones, and this is one I thought of actually just this morning, because at one point my eye came on that piece of furniture that all hotel rooms have to hold the TV. But if you look at the way that that is designed and built, it's built around the idea of a CRT, thick, narrow. So now if you have a widescreen flat panel, it's not going to fit in that anymore. So if you run the Carolina Inn, you might be saying, oh my gosh, when I stop making CRTs, I'm going to have to buy this furniture all over again to accommodate new technology. So this is disruptive. This is when it has consequences that are really going to be a pain, a financial burden, or you're going to experience some palpable sense of disruption in a very explicit way. And again, a lot of that is in the eye of the beholder. What might be sustaining for one might be disruptive for another. But basically, I think it's helpful to try and think about innovations falling into one of these two broad categories. So this is a book I like. This is a book that's almost 10 years old now, but I found it really kind of interesting because he dwells a lot on the disruptive aspects of innovation, but I think it's interesting and important, all the more so because it's what he does. So I'm going to follow him now here for a few slides. Before I do, are there any questions, comments, points anyone wants to make? No one's getting more food. I'm really disappointed with this food. All right. Here's an interesting innovation. Anyone recognize this thing?
C90.
Is that a 90 or a 50?
C9, it looks like C9.
Okay.
Might be a C50.
I thought it was the C. Anyway, the label said it was the C50. I don't know. And this kind of goes as to why innovation is a little bit hard to fathom and predict. So Honda, this is a story that Christensen tells. Honda was trying to break into the American motorcycle market in the 50s and early 60s. And holding sway at that time were BMW and Harley-Davidson. They had all these big bikes, and America's paradigm of motorcycles was I need a big Harley or a big BMW. And so Honda was having a very, very difficult time, particularly with a little bike like this, which, although it was very popular in Japan, was not getting anywhere. I mean, the dealers didn't want it on their showroom floors, taking up space, nothing. So one day, they were trying to break into in Southern California. One of the marketers for this said, okay, I'm going to blow off some steam on a Sunday. I'm going to take it up into the hills of Los Angeles and just ride around on it. And he was riding around, and a couple of people said, where'd you get that bike? That's great for riding around on the dirt trails like this. And finally, a light bulb went off. They were marketing this product in the wrong way. What they were doing is, what they had stumbled across was a whole new market they had never even dreamed of before. That is the dirt bike. Once they got that and they changed their orientation, how to market this thing, Honda took off and almost put Harley-Davidson out of business. And they also had a nice ad campaign. If you're old like me, you remember seeing these ads from time to time. Honda. So that shows one of the conundrums of innovation is that you're moving into, if you use business terms, a market that you don't even know is there, or you're very uncertain about. None of the old rules apply from your current markets will apply for the new one. And so you're having to kind of go out on thin ice or into the unknown, probe the darkness in ways that you can't predict. So that's one of the things. And one of the things that kills innovation is that you try to apply the old paradigm, the old marketing style, onto the new. And that always runs the danger of stifling the new innovation, because it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole. You're trying to make it conform to old things when it's trying to actually create a brand new market that you might not even know was there. So we said there are two broad categories. One, again, sustaining innovations. These are incremental. They are in line with the established paradigm. Word is Word and Excel is Excel. All your old macros hopefully will work in the new as they did in the old. They're valued by the current customers who don't want to have to relearn things. All they want to do is be able to do what they're doing perhaps more efficiently, faster, but that's what they like. And it's very predictable. The whole methodology, the whole way of managing sustaining innovations is textbook, MBA. That's what you learn in MBA in business school, is how to manage this sort of thing. By contrast, the disruptive innovations, when they come out initially, they underperform often what is currently there. They try to establish a whole new paradigm, which is an uncomfortable process for all of us. Their appeal is unknown often when you start to embark on this, and the results are very unpredictable. And how to manage the process is also to some extent somewhat unpredictable. You need to think about manufacturing, and in business terms, manufacturing, marketing, all that stuff is going to have to be different than the way you're currently doing business. And the tensions within the business that are generating this are significant, and in more than one case have killed an innovative product. Okay, I want to tell another story, and this is about ice harvesting. But before I go down this path, anyone have any comments, questions? Yes, sir.
Back on your slide before that you had the disruptive one.
Yep.
Under there, I don't see anything which is, you'll have an innovation that will threaten, let's say, a company, its current stream of business, and they'll hold it back because it will have people jump to that instead of maintaining their current stream, which is sort of different from any of those.
That actually is a very real problem for a lot of companies, because, I'm not an MBA person myself, but as I understand it, you think of a business as having sort of a life cycle, a beginning and an end, and as you get into the mature stage of your business, you're making widgets or pink these or that, you need to think about what the next thing is, the next generation, the next wave. And when you're, this is really, your point's well taken, but this really is there, because if your new business is underperforming, both in terms of revenue, say it's a money sink, then the people who are in the mature part of your business start to grouse about these guys who are just siphoning off all the profits in a very unprofitable line of business. And how long can you hold that line before you give up on the innovation, say this will never work, we can't afford to keep making the red ink black from the profitable part of the organization. So this tension is something that's very real, and there's no formulaic way of saying, okay, at this point we got a fish and cut bait or something like that. So it's charged with a lot of unknowns and uncertainties. Yeah.
Do you think that there's actually a third category, which is a combination of these two?
Well, actually, the other category is revolutionary innovations, but I tended not to put that up because I think you can say there's a continuum from here to something that's merely disruptive to something that's revolutionary here. And moving from here to here, some of this is in the eye of the beholder. Again, what's disruptive for one person may not be so disruptive for someone else. And how far you have to move away. At one point, does this flip over to become that? Again, that's part of the eye of the beholder. So this is a simplification, but it's simply to get a set of categories that we might be able to work with. That's all. Did that answer your question?
The reason I was asking is because in terms of your example with Microsoft Office, with other software producers, occasionally you'll get an upgrade that just ends up essentially being a downgrade. And
right.
The customer has a certain expectation, but it doesn't, it underperforms,
right.
It becomes unpredictable, and so that's why I was asking about having something that's kind of in between.
That's interesting. Well, is that not even between it? It's almost like a retrograde. That's almost like an unsustaining innovation, right? iMovie on the Mac was a good example of that. Everyone liked the older version of iMovie. When a new version came out, people said, this is less. This is not what I had before. This is not good. So and this is really, I hadn't thought of that, but you almost want to put something in another column here, an unsustaining innovation, one that's not a good idea at all. Right. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the importance of timing in terms of introducing and also preparing the market? Because I think there's a lot of that sort of context that is shaped. A lot of innovations that may, like biofuels and things, alternative energies that were talked about in the 70s that are now being reintroduced, or the whole concept now of how companies are trying to sort of shape the future for accepting the new innovation.
Yeah, those perceptions are all part of the kind of the ecosystem in which either innovation is going to thrive or not. Why are biofuels now seeming like they're taking off, whereas they didn't earlier, because there's this compelling thing called climate change that's sort of breathing down our necks, and that's what's making it, fuel prices and stuff like that. Although it's interesting that the biofuel is triggering, as I understand it, because farmers are now selling all their corn off to be biofuels, is generating pressure in other areas like, cattle prices and meat prices and things like that. So it's interesting how that kind of trade-off there, almost like kind of got the cane toad. Is that really the innovation that we really should be looking for in terms of meeting the climate change challenge? One more thing, and then we'll move on.
I think that a lot of these innovations that we're talking about are sort of material kinds of innovations that have production and so on, but then you have things like subprime mortgages, which were process innovations that looked like they were sustaining. They're just continuing the way things were done in the mortgage business, finding new markets and commoditizing new markets. There are innovations in the mortgage industry.
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, I like that.
But they
Yeah.
backfired because certain assumptions about what was going to make them work changed in the system as a whole.
So the subprime innovation was more like the cane toad in Australia.
Yeah.
That seemed like a good idea at the time. Maybe even it wasn't a good idea at the time.
For those people who prospered under it, yes.
Yeah. If you could talk about, I just hear some of these stories about people borrowing everything, down payment, it's just, you wonder how people made those decisions. But yeah, I guess to some people it seemed like a good idea at the time, but look where it got us. Ooh. Yes, one more, sure.
I think it's a good idea to quote Machiavelli in his advice
Okay.
to Prince, chapter 5, second paragraph. On-
See, to be or not to be, that's the
On
question.
the dangers of innovation. The person who innovates has enemies, all those in the system who have benefited by the old order, and few supporters who will benefit by the new.
Yep. Good, I'll have to remember that one, that's good. True. So that's what makes innovation, if you really sort of play out what's involved in innovation the whole way through, it's challenging. Okay, so I have another story for you here. This is about ice harvesting. So, people decided down here that ice in summertime is kind of a good thing. And so in the early 19th century, that's when things got started. And it started around 1805, 1806. The first year they were in this, they shipped this much ice. And people discovered a market. This is cool. And so they got more efficient. They had better ice harvesting methods, better ways of shipping it more quickly. And so they were able to raise the harvest from 7 tons to 150 tons in the span of about 45 years. Great. And as I said, this was all done by means of innovation, these sustaining innovations that they found, ways of shipping it more efficient, way of cutting it more efficiently, things of that sort. And by the 1870s, this is a booming business. There are 14 firms just in Boston, and they're shipping now 700 K-tons annually. I'll keep this figure in mind, because that's the figure in the 1870s. So good. Now, the costs for people purchasing this ice were a little bit different. Up in the north, that was your price here. But look at the price for if you were down here in North Carolina or in Georgia. Bit of a difference. Kind of our precious commodity. So when technology comes in, technology being a great enabler of innovation, they began to discover that you could use technology to create refrigeration. In 1868, the first ice plant in New Orleans was built. And they were able to sell ice for $35 per ton. Now, when you look at this, in retrospect, you can say the writing's on the wall, right there. That there's a bit of dissonance that you should be paying attention to. However, as things by 1889, there are 200 ice plants in the South. And yet the ice industry kept going its merry way. They kept introducing more and more sustaining innovations, even while they were losing the southern market. And they had look at this. Now it's 200 million tons of ice. So their sustaining innovations were really good. They got very efficient at harvesting and bringing ice down, but the market was going away. And the coup de grace, of course, was in the early 20th century when the refrigerator came into town. So by 1945, that industry, the ice harvesting industry was gone. So, I understand this is a true story. So, what do we learn from this true story? One was a failure by the people who were running the business of ice harvesting to recognize implications of the ice plan. Their creativity, the people running the ice harvesting industry, their creativity was focused on defending and enhancing the existing methods. They thought if we can just get, keep those sustaining innovations coming, then all will be right. And here's the thing I think is really important. Their very demise was obscured by their success. Business was booming, they're harvesting more and more, they're shipping more and more tons annually, and that obscured the threat and the challenge to their way of business. So in the very, very height of their success, the seeds of their demise was planted, and they couldn't see it because they were blinded a bit by the success. So the lesson is that success tends to entrench. So sustaining innovations deal and circulate around the current paradigm, whereas the disruptive ones tend to begin to create a new paradigm. And let's contextualize this. Let's ratchet up when we go away from the ice harvesting industry to this. Now this chart is something that I'm sure that you've seen. This is a growth chart on the adoption of our course management system at Dartmouth. Looks pretty good. We were at Course Info in 1999. Then we went Enterprise here in the Winter 02 with Blackboard. That's the one we have. Our winter term, we actually do 4 terms a year, including a summer term. But the summer term is a restricted enrollment one. That's why these are lagging down here. But so look at this. This looks great. You can look at here. You can generate great percentages going from here to here. Boy, isn't things wonderful? Well, but we got to be careful. If we take any lessons from the ice harvesting industry, we should not be blind that there are extreme limitations built into the way that a course management system, at least the ones today, think about what learning is. And so we should not just sit back and resting on our laurels and say, wow, we've done it, we've conquered learning, because look at these adoption numbers. That would be the mistake that perhaps the folks who were doing ice harvesting failed to see. So yeah, lurking behind this chart are the ice harvesters and their experience of things. I found this really interesting. About this, came across this in Wired magazine. I think is it Google has this one of these multi-million-dollar prizes for developing a car that gets 100 miles per gallon. I think it's Google or someone has a contest going, and so this is a prototype of a car that's trying to get to getting 100 miles per gallon. And someone went and asked one of the GM VPs about this. You know what he said? That's very nice, but they say we're doing the Dodge Volt, which is going to be kind of like a hybrid sort of car, and will get us 40 miles a gallon. We'll be able to compete with the Toyota models and things of that sort. Completely, as far as I can tell, I mean, there might be more to this story, but just on the basis of this quote alone, completely missing the boat. Completely missing the boat. Okay. But see, the thing is that it's good to kind of look at these and chuckle a little bit at some of these short-sighted things that went on, but the thing is that it happens to us all the time. We need to be very, very careful about this, because it's very, very hard to sustain the innovation when it's disruptive, because particularly if you're at the height of your success. If you're unsuccessful, you have nothing to lose, that's one thing, but if you're successful, that's in some ways the time it's hardest to innovate and sustain an innovation diffusion from its introduction to when it's in production. So I think this is useful as a reminder to us that, again, that innovation isn't just this idea. Innovation is a lot of work, and a lot of it's not easy. So it is and it isn't technology. You do have to have a good idea to start out with, but that's not the only story here. Here's another good innovation. This is great. Anyone know what this thing is? Yes, thank you. Good. Do you know? Can you tell us about it?
They're not around today.
They're not around today.
One in Wisconsin. I saw it.
Oh, you did?
Absolutely.
This particular one? Yeah, what is this thing? This thing is Amphibicar. I guess that's how you pronounce it, right? So just think, no docking fees. With this thing, you're just going to drive it into the water. You don't need to pay any docking fees, and off you go. Just as good as sailing in your own boat or going on a motorboat. I don't know if you can water ski with it, but
just don't open the doors.
The what?
Don't open the
don't open the doors, right. So it was a car that you could drive into the water and off you went. but there was no market for this. And so it didn't go. It didn't go. Anyone recognize this?
The Dvorak.
Yes. And what's the story of the Dvorak keyboard? Why was this one developed?
It's very efficient keyboard.
It's a very efficient. You know that the QWERTY keyboard was developed to make us inefficient at typing? Because typists got so fast on the mechanical typewriters that they began clogging the keys all the time. So they needed a way to slow them down so they wouldn't clog the keys all the time. So they invented the QWERTY keyboard to make us less efficient at typing. So this thing, how many of you bought a computer with this type of keyboard recently? So again, this is an interesting illustration that sometimes something superior still doesn't get adopted because it's just kind of trying to run against the wind a bit. This plane was manufactured by GM in the late period of the Second World War, and they tried to bring some of the techniques of auto mass production into aircraft mass production. This is why technology is important, because it had a few problems with it. It wasn't a reliable aircraft, and so it didn't go anywhere. And in fact, it crashed a lot, so it never was deployed. And this is another interesting story. You know, our refrigerators hum because they're electric refrigerators. You know how it got a hum? Anyone hear about a gas refrigerator? This company, Servo, had a gas refrigerator that was completely silent. No hums, nothing. GE had an electric one because GE had greater marketing strength, was able to outsell Servo, and Servo kind of shriveled away and died. So these are all kind of anecdotes. Oh, here's another one I like. Did anyone see this? This is in one of the most recent issues of Wired magazine. Anyone see this article? So this article says, gee, you know, we're in a period of openness, open standards, and you know, think about Google and Android and all this sort of stuff, and that's the way you do things, by being open and doing partnerships and not playing things close to your chest and stuff like that. But Apple breaks all those rules. They're very, very secretive. They have closed standards, and yet they're very successful. So this is the thing, I think, again, that's why innovation is so difficult, is that if you play by the rules, sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. If you don't play by the rules, sometimes you succeed. So this just, again, another example that innovation is kind of a tough thing, and it's hard to, it's not formulaic. It resists being reduced to a simple formula: play by the rules, don't play the rules, don't play by the rules, things of that sort. It's very, very challenging, but that's what kind of makes it fun. So reasons that innovation can fail: there's a key technology that's missing in the example of the aircraft. There's problems in scaling production sometimes. You can't get it out and get it marketed. Economic power of the rivals, that was the refrigerator problem. That GE was just could not market the Servo product. Timing can be wrong, and just prejudice, that people aren't interested in it, or they just think, oh, this is a new idea, do I have to change again, I have to upgrade, or I have to do something even worse than that. So these are all reasons why innovation can go south. And also, it was just the wrong guess. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but the idea turned out to be not such a good one in the end. I like this from one of the Honda executives, that we think of innovation, I have this brainstorm, and it's just like smooth sailing and off we go. Whereas I understand at Apple, what they do is when they're designing a product like the iPhone, they set up 10 teams, and each team designs its own iPhone. And they sweat blood over each of these designs. So you have 10 different designs. And then they winnow it down to 3, and then they winnow it down to 1. But think of all the work they did, and 90% of those designs were junk. But they had to go through that work. They had to explore every option in order to come up with the best possible design that they could conceive. So that's where I think it's important to think too, is that we think, oh, just an idea and innovation is just going to take off. Well, maybe not. There's a lot of failure associated with innovation. We hear stories about the successes, but I think it's probably true that for every, there's probably 9 failures for every 1 success that we hear about. Like venture capital, I think. there's food is still back there, everyone. There's coffee, I'm sure back there. So, any comments so far? We have a few minutes left. Any thoughts?
I guess we haven't talked yet, and I imagine we will some more, but about, I mean, at least the way I've been listening to this presentation, it's kind of been from my perspective as one who has some influence over that innovation.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I guess the point that I would like to make is that we haven't addressed this as much from our faculty's perspective or our students.
Right. We're circling back towards that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
One observation I've had is that innovation is time-consuming, and for faculty members who are at a research university like this, and Dartmouth the same way, they simply don't have the time to put into some of these innovative things because they are a real time sink.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would add to that, actually, I completely agree, but I would add to that maybe even more important than not having the time, speaking as a faculty member myself, is that the reward system isn't in place that makes it worthwhile for me to spend the time.
Yeah,
to take the risk.
Right.
To take the
Yeah.
risk.
I mean, we'd have to thread these innovations into an ongoing system that we really can't afford to fail. So it has to be done in a way that basically denies failure, because if we fail, it's not just bad for us, it's bad for the outcome, which is the reason why we do it in the first place. So, I mean, we have to be so careful about this.
I would argue, though, that actually students learn something from seeing their professors fail. And I'm perfectly willing to let my students see me look like an idiot, but that's risky and it takes time, and
But I guess do the professors learn something when they see their students fail?
Well, that's fair enough. Yeah.
But the
Well, I
reward
mean,
system-
it might fail how? I mean, if a professor says something about physics that's factually wrong,
Right, that's different.
that's one thing. If they try, we're going to try this today and see if it works, and then it doesn't work, then we say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. As sort of in-classroom engagement, that's a whole different context for that. So I think that's more what you're saying. It's okay
Yeah.
in that latter sense to be able
Yes,
to fail
right.
at that.
Yeah.
Yes, in the back.
My concern is that we sort of stressed innovation as far as using technology rather than pedagogy.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, like Blackboard is an example. Instituting Blackboard, which really doesn't change the paradigm of teaching.
Right.
And so, looking at how you teach, not been supported as much as the technology.
But again, so this is where I think I'm grateful that you brought that up, because here I think we start coming to your point. How does all this innovation rigmarole come up with where we are in terms of teaching and learning? Go back and think about that chart I just put up about adoption of Blackboard at Dartmouth, and I'm sure you have a similar one. It was just going up like that. So there's some value. One, there's value perceived in the product. Otherwise, you wouldn't see those adoption rates. And it does reinforce the paradigm of the way a course is taught and how learning happens. That reinforces the old model. I agree 100% with that. But the challenge of changing the paradigm for all of us, so that as I'm telling my staff now, my instructor staff, your task now is to overcome Blackboard. We have to somehow augment it, overcome the limitations. And the biggest limitation in my mind is that thinks of a student's career in their academic as a bunch of islands. Isolated islands or silos. So I'm like a cane toad hopping from course to course with no place that's my own home. That's the biggest limitation, I think. There's nothing that cuts, as a student, that gives me a space, an environment that cuts across all those silos, allows me to organize them, have a depot where I can organize my academic life.
That's true even within Blackboard, it's so sequential.
Yes, exactly. But think about, again, this is where I think all this talk about innovation is pertinent, because, and why we need to be reminded why it's challenging and often fails, is because when you're bucking up against strong paradigms, and some have already been articulated, the reward structure is not in place to reward you for this. This is the way I've always done it. It's more efficient to simply take the slides I've always taught against, stand up in front of the room, and give my lecture and walk out the door, because I got to go to committee meetings, I got to write my book, I got to do a paper, and so. And these are all legitimate. It's not like some of the faculty are slouchers, and if they would just get with the program, everything would be cool. So there are forces at work here that make innovation, if we're really working towards innovating the whole learning process, that make it a really formidable challenge that we shouldn't underestimate. It doesn't mean we shouldn't go there, but it means like we shouldn't underestimate it. So I think it's important to look at innovation as a process, because that's what we're trying to do here. Understand where the challenges are and how to negotiate it, so that we might be better equipped for going back out and trying to help us all innovate as a community in terms of what we're doing with learning. So I just summarized, so we can all leave now, because that's really kind of the message for the day. Let's go here, then here.
Seems like one of the other problems is the fact that there's this notion that, with your chart with the people, the number of courses that are being taught in Blackboard, is that is the tool that's available. And a lot of times, faculty members might not know that there are other ways in which you can do these things, because either the department is requiring or requesting that you use a specific tool. And so beyond the fact of the innovation, you've got this one piece that you have to work with and trying to find an innovative way to maybe use that one piece. Whereas maybe when technology was still emerging on campus, it seemed like there were a lot more options for people to be using in their teaching.
Right, and the CMS at one point itself was a great innovation. And there's got to be value perceived in that, because I know my faculty don't go anywhere they don't have to, in terms of their teaching. So if there weren't perceived value, I like to think of it as our current course management systems are kind of the course management system 1.0. And what we need to do is like the Web 2.0 that has arrived. We need to get the CMS 2.0 to finally get here. One that is for the students and not just, because the one that's in place now is for the faculty. And I think that one of the values or perceptions of value in the current thing is that it just makes a lot of the administrative work of conducting the course a lot easier. I can repurpose things more easily. I can send out emails. I don't have to keep track of who's in the course because it's done automatically on feeds from the SIS. And that's a great boon. I mean, it gets all that administrative stuff out of the way and simplifies things so that you can really focus on things. So I think there's been a real benefit to CMS 1.0.
And one of the things that I think caused a big jump in our use of a CMS when we went from Course Info to Blackboard was incorporating the administrative data, so that faculty no longer had to do the upfront work of creating the course or adding the user, whatever.
Right.
All that stuff was done for them. All they had to go in was say, make this course active, now I'm using it.
Yeah, a lot of my faculty said before Blackboard they were having to keep their own email rosters of who was in the course, and they had to kind of keep up with who dropped and stuff. Now I just say email everyone, and it just, as you say, it gets the feed and it's always up to date, so I don't have to worry about it. Stuff like that. So, yeah, that's a challenge. You had a comment.
Yeah, there's an innovative company located not far from here, Red Hat. And then if you go into their lobby in large letters, at least this high, they have a quote from not Machiavelli, but from Mahatma Gandhi. And I always keep this in mind with working with innovation. And the quote is, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win.
Yeah, I mean, I know sometimes and it's interesting to think about kind of doors in with innovation, whether you kind of go from the ground up, from the top. More and more these days, I'm saying going in from the top is a bad idea. If I go to my dean of faculty and say, why not do this? She'll say, my faculty won't like it. Or the other way you get put to death is, okay, well, let's give this some committees and they'll think about it. Let's have some faculty committees kind of weigh in on what they think about that. And that's death. There was another comment. Yeah?
I have a question for you. I'm a technologist. Dr. Moss here is an instructor, a faculty member. I'm expected to come up with innovation designs. That's just part of my job.
Right.
But for faculty, they're not usually expected in the teaching realm to be very innovative. For research, you bet. Yeah, they have to come up with new designs. But how do we change the culture of the university saying, for teaching, we want you to be more innovative? Because right now it seems a lot of new ideas specifically for teaching are kind of quashed right off the bat, either from the faculty themselves or from the top down. How do we get past that?
If you figure out a way to get past, and especially the reward part of it.
And the world will beat it past my door.
That one, we all will. We all will. That one I've given up on. I don't think I can reform the institution in terms of trying to give faculty more promotional credit for innovations and job well done in teaching.
Well, how do we get around it?
Anyone have any bright ideas?
I think if you look at
It's a $64,000 question.
some of the professional ed field, they do look at that, and there are approaches to like reflective practice that is really reinforced. And some institutions have really embraced that in terms of supporting faculty in their own teaching improvement and value in the whole promotion and tenure process. So
I can add to this
they're on
too.
marks.
I
Yeah,
think,
please.
In my experience, which is limited to medical dental teaching, the faculty are woefully ignorant of all the educational research that's going on, that are bringing in all these ideas into teaching philosophy and into teaching effectiveness. They do not know any of it, because they go in and teach for 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks perhaps.
Yes.
And then they leave. And
They
each
leave.
year, and
Yep.
they don't think any longer about, is someone thinking? And then you'll have a meeting where you say, shouldn't we be able to do this, that, and say, oh yeah, I read a paper on that somewhere, you know? And I mean, this is not in our consciousness. This whole body of literature about teaching effectiveness and value in learning, we don't know that. We don't know about our own specific fields in science and our research, but we don't think about teaching in the same way.
Yeah, the medical school context sometimes is always very, very challenging. Because often, at least at Dartmouth, a lot of times, there will be a parade of faculty members. You bring in the expert, they give a lecture or two on this, they go out the door, and that's the end of their interaction with the class, and the next expert comes in. And that is very, very difficult to get something sustained there. So yes, there are challenges there.
And one of the things I think hits on that also is I had a faculty member recently how many of you are members of the Learn list? You know, I send out lots of stuff to that list. Here's a conference, here's a training session, here's this, here's that. All of those are, almost all of them either have a registration fee and or travel costs. And a faculty member contacted me recently and said, these are great, I would love to go to some of them. How do faculty get travel money to go to something that's not a disciplinary conference to present a paper? So the professional development opportunities, supported professional development opportunities for faculty, at least on the academic side, I don't know if the health and affairs side is any different, are really limited to learn how to do teaching.
Also, I mean, this echoes back the literature here. When you comment and read about innovation from a kind of a business school perspective, they talk about, as I mentioned before, that the innovative practice typically is in red ink sometimes for many, many years. So someone has to bleed a bit for innovation to get going, sustain, and maybe take over. So this maybe circles back to your question. Yeah, so someone has to bleed some money to allow these faculty to go to these development opportunities. And the question is, whose budget is going to bleed?
Right.
So you have to find places where you can bleed a little bit so this can happen. I also think, hold on just a second, I'll be right there, that it's sort of like that chart on adoption at Dartmouth. You know, we started with only 50 folks and got up to, you know, we're almost, because we teach about 400 courses, 450 courses a term. So when we're at 375, we're a fair percentage. And it's a gradual process. It's a kind of a gradual process. You start with some successes and hope that you can sustain some momentum. And I think there is momentum. I'm sure you're seeing that here. I'm seeing at Dartmouth, of all places. I mean, Dartmouth, talk about conservative and unmoving and, you know, geez. It's like a cane toad. Does you know those cane toads are so voracious in eating they can get as fat as 4 kilos? Imagine a toad weighing 4 kilos. So think about an immovable object.
You're drawing some parallels now.
So I am seeing some movement there. I don't know if the institution will ever reward. And I can tell you a very cynical story at Dartmouth's expense, a little bit about that. But I think there is some movement. Yeah, did you have a thought?
Let me respond to Libby's question about not having fun. Let's turn technology to that problem and start using distance learning systems to set up some of these conferences. We have someone sitting in this room, I will not identify him, who designs these distance learning facilities, and he could fill us in on a lot of this.
Right.
Just a quick comment. I've heard frustration at different EDUCAUSE events throughout the years. I sometimes have expressed my own frustration with some of these events where technologists come in from the various universities around the country, and they start talking about what can we do to get faculty to sort of become interested in all these great innovative approaches to improving their courses. And one campus will say, well, we offer them this, and another campus, and it's sort of like this bidding war. Well, we give ours laptops, and we go home and give them back rubs, right? I mean, at a certain point...
I'll go there.
It depends on who's giving their back rub, right? And so, at some point, though, for me anyway, it became clear that if we sort of sit back and we're patient and we look at this over time, we look at when email became the big disruptive technology. I can remember some faculty members not wanting to use email. Now, what faculty member today could get by without that? And then there was the websites. Faculty members didn't want to create websites, and now what faculty member sort of goes through a day without some interaction with the web? I'm sure there's a few. And then the research technology, instead of pouring through each tome in the library through huge volumes, how could they still compete against younger faculty who know how to use the electronic tools and can do their research much more quickly, therefore publish much more quickly. So I think we just have to be patient. We have to introduce technology in ways that they're comfortable with. There are a lot of faculty here on this campus that do this, even though there's not reward systems, because they think it's the right thing to do. And we need to find opportunities to let them share their work with others, and know that over time, that if this is a good thing, if it's the right thing, there will be adoption. And so just keep plugging away.
I think another aspect to this is we haven't done, and I think I speak for the type of role of the people that are here, haven't done our homework in showing the ROI with regard to learning. And we often, we don't build evaluation. A lot of times we gather the stats, server stats and stuff, and say, look at the adoption. We got all this, great adoption on course info, and that's what we push, and we show administrators, and we show faculty, but we don't do, and it's a tough beast to show learning.
It's a very, very tough
learning
one.
is very tough.
We could have an all-day seminar just on trying to demonstrate ROI on learning technologies. It's a very, very difficult one, particularly when your audience is someone who is thinking in terms of numbers and charts. It's a difficult one.
But do we show an ROI on learning? Have we historically had an ROI calculation on learning?
No.
Right. So it's not new to technology. It's that we don't know what the ROI on learning is in general.
Right. But it is. But when we do things with using technology, it's more visible, and we cross. We need to show that. Where the faculty doesn't have to show it; they just do the thing in their classroom. I mean, of course they do, but.
There's a comment over there.
Well, on the subject of rewards, there's substantial grant money available in the sciences from the National Science Foundation to support educational technological development. And it seems to me that, and in fact, 40% of my salary at the moment is being paid from one of these grants. And it seems like the university could have, often I get emails about research money opportunities and offices that find grant opportunities and look into it. I never get any information about the possible availability of grants to support innovation in technology for teaching. And it seems like the university, maybe your office, could really benefit the entire university by digging up these sources and letting us know about them.
Are you on the learn list by any chance?
I am.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, I try to send out. I try to send them out when I find them, but they're not. And NSF actually, just to relate that, the National Science Foundation does have a lot of money for innovation in education, and they are actually interested in cyber infrastructure education in general. So I think cases could be made for some innovative technology used in education that's not science. I think.
Yeah, so just people need to know about these opportunities.
Right.
And look and see if it's for them.
Comment here.
I wanted to address the other side of it, and what Casey was getting at is issue of motivation on the part of faculty, that we can bring all the technology we want, and what's their motivation. So where I've had the greatest success is where they perceive a problem in the classroom or something that they want to achieve, and then there might or might not be a match in technology that where we're innovating and it meets their need. For example, with Blackboard, to use Blackboard as an example, when Teams LX was introduced, I'm not sure how many people are using it on campus, but I know that Teams LX has a big role in my school because it met a need. People immediately grabbed onto this who wanted to do team collaborative projects and find groups who could work together and build something. So the wiki tool in Blackboard became really popular.
Right.
Another thing was video conferencing. So we have an issue where, again, you're bringing people from either getting people to go remotely or bringing people in can be costly. Well, we invested in very expensive video conferencing technology to bring people from around the world into our classrooms, and that wasn't very popular. Why wasn't it popular? Because it was really difficult to use. Faculty could not just do this. So we could introduce this innovation, and I had one motivated faculty member who said, yeah, I've got somebody in Kuwait who I want to talk to my class, so we'll do it. But it had to match up with the technology on the other end. We had to negotiate a lot to make that happen, not just the other logistical issues, but a lot of technological issues. But now, as things like SIP-based technologies become available, and you can stick a little webcam on a computer in the classroom, it suddenly took off.
Yeah.
And now I have people using this all over my schools. This was a case where this was a problem perceived by faculty where technology could mesh.
Right.
So as long as there's motivation, you can have success. But if there isn't motivation, then you get into the other issues of rewards and stuff like that.
And I think I think it's already been mentioned here, but one of the things that's important to do is not to put the cart before the horse. More and more these days, you can toss out some technology, but it may or may not get used unless it really addresses a need, an educational challenge, or something that's happening. There's a need for it. It's probably, we're designing a life sciences building that's going to open in the year 2010, and we've done this a little bit ass backwards in the sense that we've sort of designed these new classrooms without really the pedagogy being there yet. So we're betting that, or placing a bet, hoping that we have some years yet to try and get the life sciences curriculum to evolve, so it'll take advantage of what for us would be kind of a new classroom equipment there. Obviously, you'd rather do it the other way around, is get the curriculum going, and then you bring the technology to support it that way. It is 11:30, and we're about halfway through my slide set, but that's fine. I don't care. I hope that this has been, if nothing else, maybe giving you a little bit to think about as you go on your appointed rounds, and we can continue to talk about it, I think.
Yeah, and I actually have an additional Post-it question for all of you that Fred's comments brought up, and that is, for those of you who teach, what is your biggest problem, issue, need in teaching? That would be a great Post-it question. Think about it and jot it down. If you don't think of one today, but you think of one later, you can always send stuff like this to learnit@unc.edu. We would love to hear that kind of stuff, because knowing what problems you are trying to address, what needs there are that aren't being met, really can help us, I think, help guide us in looking at new technologies that might address those. So, Malcolm, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.